Up is down, war is peace, and the US, Canada, and the Netherlands have accused China of genocide.
This is forced labor, this is forced sterilizations, forced abortions. John, the kind of things that we haven't seen in an awfully long time in this world.
To be fair, they're experts in genocide. The US and its junior imperial partner, Canada, wiped out their indigenous populations, and today the US is responsible for the 3 biggest human rights catastrophes in the world in Afghanistan, Syria, and Yemen. And the Netherlands is just coming to terms with its massacres in Indonesia. Mike Pompeo's successor at the State Department, Antony Blinken, is sticking with the genocide claim.
Secretary Pompeo designated the Chinese Communist Party as having engaged in genocide regarding the Uighur Muslim population. Do you agree with that designation?
That would be my judgment as well.
You do agree?
Yes.
That's despite the State Department's top lawyers stating that whatever might be happening in Xinjiang, it's not genocide. That's right, Chinese Communist Party genocide denialists have infiltrated the US State Department to impurify our precious bodily fluids. So what did Pompeo and Blinken base their accusations of genocide on? There must have been a pretty strong body of on-the-ground reporting and research. Or not. It turns out that just one guy is responsible for pretty much the whole narrative. His name is Adrian Zenz.
Adrian's research, as many of you know, has been key in establishing the existence of the camps in the first place and in documenting the buildup of the PRC police state.
Zenz appeared almost overnight as a go-to expert on Xinjiang and Uyghurs. Now he's a regular on mainstream outlets and even on the supposedly progressive news show Democracy Now!
Adrian Zenz is a German researcher who's considered an authority on China's detention of ethnic minorities.
Adrian Zenz.
Adrian Zenz.
Adrian Zenz.
Adrian Zenz.
Zenz.
Adrian Zenz.
Adrian. Dr. Zenz.
Adrian Zenz.
In fact, in Mike Pompeo's official statement accusing China of genocide, he directly credited Adrian Zenz. But most of his so-called research has been discredited, and he's been revealed to be a straight-up fabulist. A Grey Zone News investigation showed that Zenz's claim of 1 million Uyghurs detained in camps was based on a single report by Istiklal TV, a Uyghur exile media organization based in Turkey, which was republished by Newsweek Japan. In other words, no evidence and not even an attempt. Meanwhile, Zenz's study accusing China of forced sterilizations didn't contain any proof of coercion. Grey Zone showed how Zenz consistently framed the expansion of public healthcare services in Xinjiang as evidence of a genocide in the making. Equating expanded access to birth control with genocide is what the Christian right does, so it makes perfect sense that Zenz, an evangelical fundamentalist himself, holds this view. Zenz's first book is a psychedelic trip through the mind of a rapture-ready Christer. Titled Worthy to Escape, Why All Believers Will Not Be Raptured Before the Tribulation, the book claims that in the end times, God's refining process will wipe out all unbelieving Jews who refuse to come to Christ. So Zenz writes racist fantasies about Jews like me. Who knows what he thinks will happen to Uighur Muslims? He also says that Satan is using postmodernism to attack gender authority structures and undermine what he believes are God's unique but different role assignments for men and women. Clearly, he's against women's rights, so does he support criminalizing birth control in his native Germany and here in the US, where he now resides? Even more deranged, Zenz's big genocide study claimed that women in Xinjiang receive 800 to 1,400 IUD insertions per capita. That means every Uyghur woman is surgically implanted with 4 to 8 IUDs every single day of the year. Evidently, none of the outlets that feverishly published his claims bothered to give a cursory examination to the evidence, or lack thereof, that he presents. In reality, the decrease in birth rate is a normal, predictable outcome of economic development. When people are more financially secure, they choose to have fewer kids and do it later in life. In fact, China's pouring money into Xinjiang to develop its economy. According to this 2015 US government study, to decrease ethnic instability in Xinjiang, the Chinese government's plan is to economically develop the region. That's right, Chinese Communist Party agents have also time traveled to 2015 to infiltrate the US Navy postgraduate school and write a study trying to justify genocide. Damn you, Xi! As a result of this economic development, China's birth rate is falling at rapid rates in all regions, which comes with its own set of problems like an aging population, similar to what the US is dealing with. So Chinese lawmakers are now pushing for the universal 2-child policy to be changed to 3. But this rapture-ready fanatic Adrian Zenz isn't the only source for these claims of a genocide, right? Well, Newsweek cites Adrian Zenz. How about CNN, the self-described most trusted name in news? CNN says its reporting found that some Uighur women were being forced to use birth control and undergo sterilization. There it is, its own reporting. Can't argue with that. The article was based on a report by Adrian Zenz. What the f***? The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum accuses China of crimes against humanity and genocide against Uyghurs. They reference leaked government documents and researchers, presumably referring to Zenz. With Zenz at the center, a cast of shady characters have promoted this disinformation to support the phony genocide claim, like Rushan Abbas, former Pentagon contractor who worked for Radio Free Asia, a US propaganda mouthpiece started by the CIA.
In 2017, Rushan Abbas, a Uyghur American, stopped calling her family in China to protect them.
My sister is probably being held in one of those modern-day concentration camps.
Rushan Abbas is executive director at Campaign for Uyghurs.
The Chinese government is getting away with this mass atrocity.
Rushan Abbas, a Uyghur American activist who's also with us in D.C.
And Darren Byler, he's a fellow at the Wilson Center, which is funded by the US government and a host of other NATO governments, big banks, and corporations. His resume shows he's also been funded to the tune of $100,000 through the US Department of Education. He does panels with Louise Grieve, former vice president of the CIA cutout National Endowment for Democracy, who now runs the NED-funded Uighur Human Rights Project.
This is a cold-blooded genocide, and the world has to end business as usual.
Then there's Human Rights Watch China director Sophie Richardson. This cold warrior wrote an op-ed in the liberal interventionist Foreign Affairs magazine calling for Biden to confront China over human rights. What the hell are the people at Human Rights Watch smoking to believe the guy who just bombed Syria and sponsors Israel's project of apartheid has a shred of credibility on human rights? Then there's the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, a self-described independent, nonpartisan think tank which is totally dependent on funding from the Australian and American Departments of Defense, NATO, weapons makers, the Embassy of Japan, and the Embassy of Israel, among others. Independent dependence makes a lot of sense, and dollars. The Uighur genocide claim was virtually unheard of before 2018. Up until that point, Western media coverage of the issue was dramatically different. Take the New York Times. In the 1980s, it published a series of articles about how Uighur Muslims were actually prospering and Islam was flourishing under Chinese rule. The article even said that some communist officials were also practicing Muslims. In 1994, the New York Times reported that Uighur extremists were returning from Afghanistan, where the CIA spent $1 billion arming what it called a university of jihad. The Times noted that Afghan veterans have fought in 2 Western provinces where they've armed and trained Chinese Muslim rebels. By the 1980s, this separatist movement was becoming violent. In one 1997 incident the Times reported on, about 1,000 Muslim separatists of the Uighur ethnic minority rampaged through the town, Yining, on Wednesday, smashing cars, burning shops, and beating up ethnic Chinese to protest Beijing's rule. In the wake of the US destruction of Yugoslavia, the Times noted that separatists fantasize about a NATO bombing campaign. This Uighur separatist movement, its violent anti-Han rampages, or the militants returning from Afghanistan are barely mentioned in any of the contemporary New York Times reports claiming genocide. In 1981, the Washington Post wrote about growing ethnic tensions in Xinjiang, noting that Peking has taken pains to ensure ethnic rights and elevate minority group members to leadership positions. In Xinjiang, a kind of affirmative action program has been started at the provincial university to guarantee that 60% of new students are from ethnic backgrounds. Today, none of this gets mentioned in the Washington Post's coverage. How about Newsweek? Back in 2000, it reported that Xinjiang was a weak point that threatened to fragment China along ethnic lines, that Uyghur separatists threatened the security of Beijing, and some might even join forces with Islamic holy warriors. Now it's all genocide all the time. With these misleading or outright false claims based on manipulated statistics, the only evidence for Uyghur genocide is anecdotal, which is hard to prove or disprove. But the testimony in Western media is often full of contradictions. Take the case of Sairagul Sautbay. In 2019, she told the UK tabloid The Daily Mail that she witnessed concentration camp inmates being flayed, raped by guards in front of other prisoners, given injections that made them infertile, and force-fed pork. Keep in mind this is the same tabloid that has spent years peddling Islamophobic hysteria and once warned about Muslim fanatics hijacking the royal wedding. Sautbay has told similar stories in more respectable newspapers like Foreign Policy, Haaretz, and Deutsche Welle. But back in 2018, she told the Globe and Mail that she did not personally see violence. For some reason, she completely changed her story. Maybe she was fearful and traumatized, or maybe she falsified it. Apparently, none of the outlets that published her testimony bothered to check into that discrepancy. Then there's Turnasai Zia Wundhun. She's the central character in the forced sterilization narrative cooked up by Adrian Zenz. She's delivered teary testimonies to the BBC, CNN, and Democracy Now! A few months before those reports, however, she told BuzzFeed News, "I wasn't beaten or abused." Again, why did she change her story, and more importantly, why did all of these media outlets fail to do a basic check into her past statement? In my research, the first mention of Uighur genocide took place back in 1997, when several so-called Chinese dissidents testified in Congress. One woman named Rizvangul Uighur claimed that China's birth control policy involved murdering babies as soon as they were born. She said the one-child policy was so strictly enforced that babies are being killed in delivery room without seeing the mother's face and world. Representative Chris Smith, a homophobic bigot from the Christian right, claimed that Uighur women are often taken physically to the abortion mill. Forced abortions can be performed very late in pregnancy, even the 9th month. Sometimes the baby's skull is crushed with forceps as it emerges from the birth canal. Either the woman or her husband may then be forcibly sterilized. That's the same Chris Smith who several months before was railing against abortion rights at the so-called March for Life rally and accusing Bill Clinton of murdering unborn children.
You are, and your legacy will be, abortion president. You know, Mr. President, that the scriptures admonish us to pray for those in authority, and we will be faithful to that. As believers, we will pray and fast and sincerely hope that you reject the culture of death.
Neither Rizvangul Uighur nor Chris Smith bothered to mention that in 1997, Uyghurs and other minorities were not subject to the one-child policy. So the birth rate in Xinjiang province was 19.66, meaning there were nearly 20 births per 1,000 people. Meanwhile, in Beijing, the birth rate was 7.91. So were the Han Chinese genociding themselves? Of course, there was a clear political goal with a bogus testimony delivered in Congress. It was coordinated to be released on the day that Bill Clinton met with President of China, Jiang Zemin. Members of Congress were demanding Clinton take a hardline approach to China, some even using racist epithets to warn of a Chinese invasion.
The White House will not wise up till there's a full-blown rice paddy on the east lawn of the White House.
After that, save for a couple of Voice of America articles, there was no mention in Western media about the Uighur genocide until 2018.
Over 1 million ethnic Uighur Muslims and other Muslim minorities are believed to be imprisoned in internment camps.
These are the precursors to genocide.
With the Uyghurs, it's genocide.
It's now committing genocide.
Genocide of its Uighur Muslim minority.
The Uighur genocide is a repeat of the Jewish Holocaust from World War II.
Genocide in China carried out against the Muslim Uighur population.
They're committing genocide against the Uighur people.
I fought China's slow-motion genocide of Uighur Muslims. Now my family are victims.
I believe this is the only primetime cable news show that talks about the plight of the Uyghurs.
The genocide of the Uyghurs, of which there is now overwhelming evidence.
It's worth pointing out that the vast majority of American politicians taking up the supposed Uighur genocide cause are totally supportive of US-sponsored genocides around the world, like Chris Smith.
Genocide against Muslim Uyghurs.
Yup, he's still there. The same Chris Smith who welcomed Benjamin Netanyahu with a statement of unequivocal support for Israel just a few months after he oversaw the killing of 551 Palestinian children in Gaza. Or Florida Senator Rick Scott.
Communist China is committing a genocide against the Uyghurs.
Also a bestie of the butcher Benjamin Netanyahu. Then there's the neocon Michael Pillsbury.
The Uyghurs being basically facing genocide.
The same Michael Pillsbury who in the 1980s as a State Department official oversaw the CIA arming the Afghanistan Mujahideen with Stinger missiles. The same Mujahideen who would then train Uyghur jihadists. Not to mention, just recently, the US government forcibly sterilized 1,400 black women in a California prison. Haven't seen any US government officials or news media talk about that genocide. The Uyghur genocide is almost perfectly tailored for right-wing agitators who want to portray socialism as a totalitarian system akin to Nazism.
When people said never again, they were full of crap. They're just full of crap. I mean, it's just not true. I mean, this is one area where the United States should absolutely be taking a leading role. Shaving people's heads, shipping them on trains to concentration camps where you force them into labor and or sterilize them.
Many of the women who, on their own, of their own volition, became pregnant, had the Chinese government paramilitary forcefully end those pregnancies.
So they're
forcefully sterilize.
They're trying to sterilize the Uyghur population, but force the Han genetic code into other Uyghur women?
This propaganda deluge is having a powerful impact on US public opinion. In 2017, just before the Uyghur genocide narrative kicked into high gear, 53% of Americans had a favorable view of China, the highest in 3 decades. Now, a new poll shows it's down to 20%, a historic low. That's accompanied by a 150% increase in anti-Asian hate crimes in US cities. So what is this all about? Why did corporate media and militaristic right-wing politicians, along with a surprising number of progressive dupes, suddenly start freaking out about a supposed genocide in China? Xinjiang is the heart of China's Belt and Road Initiative, the economic plan that connects Asia to Europe and the Middle East. It's an alternative model to the dictatorship of the US dollar, where the World Bank and International Monetary Fund turned countries into neo-colonies for American corporations, a system backed up with the constant threat of military invasion. Why would anyone look for an alternative model to being a slave of Washington? The US can't deal with legitimate competition, so it's resorting to smears in an attempt to isolate China diplomatically and undermine its growth. It's either that, or the government and military that forcibly sterilized minority women in prisons, tortured in Abu Ghraib, relies on prison labor, and is waging genocidal wars against multiple Muslim-majority countries, just simply cares a whole lot about the Uyghurs.